Jeff, welcome to the show and thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys. Pleasure.
So, I actually want to start with a follow up question from an interview you did with our Bob Sosi, which people can check out on our website, 985thesportshub.com. When you were talking with Bob, you talked about the end of the Patriots partnership, the Belichick and Kraft partnership, and kind of Brady as well. You talk about it, you know, ending with class and decorum and how that's so rare. And it's funny because I do think it was never going to end perfect. If things were perfect, it wouldn't have ended, right? But I think a lot of local fans have this idea that it ended in this massive blow up. So to see you frame it that way, coming from the perspective of somebody who was much closer, I'm just curious if you can go a little more into that in how you felt the ending went and why it was different than maybe some other similar situations.
Well, that's a great question. And first of all, there really aren't many similar situations you can point
Right.
to for precedent. But probably the closest thing would be to look at Terry Bradshaw and Chuck Noll, or Joe Montana and Bill Walsh. And I think those are probably the closest comparisons for here. And if you look at what happened in San Francisco, that great dynasty, when Joe Montana left San Francisco, it was bitter. And it was somewhat ugly, and there was a lot of acrimony. When Bradshaw and Noel ended in Pittsburgh, I mean, Terry Bradshaw said some pretty ugly things about Chuck Noll, even to this day, and that happened 40 years ago. So I think what you see in these super competitive, super successful partnerships like you had in New England, and by the way, the New England partnership is more complex because it's three people, not two. The owner in this case, Robert Kraft, is the I refer to him in the book as the person doing shuttle diplomacy between Bill and Tom at the end. He's much more involved than the owners were in those other two relationships I referenced. And I think that's the glue that really kept Tom and Bill together for so long, and in the end had a lot to do with why it ended the way it did. I mean, if you just think about Tom driving over to Robert's house in March of 2020 to inform him that he's leaving, and Robert actually thinks he's coming over to inform him that he's staying. And in that conversation, which is very emotional, both men kind of break down. The first thing that Robert suggests to Tom is that they get on the phone with Bill, and that Tom tell Bill over the phone what he's decided. To me, that just says so much about the way these three men were functioning, the orbit they were in. And it's also somewhat predictive of how things would end with Robert and Bill 4 years later, when they stand side by side on the podium, and they literally have their arms around each other, and they said the laudatory things about each other that they did. I don't look at that as a breakup, so to speak. To me, this is more like at the end of a really long marriage, a really long successful marriage, when one of the spouses passes away. It's like now it's over, and it's really over. And the survivors, the surviving spouse and the surviving family members, have to pick up the pieces and move on. And to me, that's what happened in New England. And that's why it's so rare and so different.
When you were doing your research and your background stuff for this, and for to get getting this put together, what was one of the major things that stuck out to you, or that you discovered, that made you kind of sit back in your seat and like kind of like, wow, I never would have saw that coming, or whatever. What was the biggest thing in your research that made you really just stand up and like kind of shake your head? What was the thing that stood out to you the most?
Thank you for that question, Sharon. I had the luxury of having written a book with Steve Young, before I worked on the Dynasty. And that book I spent 5 years with Steve. And in a lot of ways, Steve's biography was really a book about the 49ers dynasty. And it was great prep work for me before coming to New England to do this book. I learned so much through Steve and the Joe Montana dynamic and all that. And coming into New England, I think the thing that jumped out at me the most, I didn't really learn until the end. And it was really recognizing the fact that Bill and Tom were, and I say this at the end of the book, they really were like the NFL's version of John and Paul for 20 years. I mean, they were the two brightest stars in the NFL. They were, if you were in New England, you worshiped them. If you were anywhere outside New England, you hated them, because they were just so much better than everybody else. And I think when you become that good at something or that great, and everybody's gunning for you, and you are that big of a star, I think the role of the owner in this situation is the least understood role, and probably the most misunderstood, because for the last 10 years of that dynastic run where they win 3 more Super Bowls, I think it's so much of that is about keeping the two stars on the same stage, sharing the same light. And there has to be some suppression of ego to do that, and to actually make it work, and to figure out who's going to actually get the credit and who's going to swallow their pride and stuff like that. And I think those machinations and how that all was managed over the last 10 years is sort of the real secret to the dynastic run. And to me, the most interesting to write about. It's more interesting than the football on the field.
So in that, kind of related to that, Jeff, the book comes out in 21. You're doing your research up to Tom Brady's departure, and I know there's you wrote an epilogue in the book, kind of adding to when Brady left. But now, as the documentary gets ready to come out and people watch that, they revisit the book. There's new context in that Bill Belichick's departure has now taken place, something that hadn't happened, or maybe wasn't entirely in the works at the time that you were writing. How do you think, in the immediate wake of Belichick's departure, how do you think that changes the context in which people will read the book and view the documentary when they check it out later this week? Again, it releases on Friday on Apple TV.
Well, it's hard to say, but I can tell you what I hope happens. I hope when people read the book, because a lot more people will read the book now after watching the series, I hope they come away with if you're a Patriots fan, you come away with a deeper sense of appreciation for what you had for 20 years. And I think if you're not a Patriots fan, which is most of the rest of the country, that I'm not saying it's going to make people become Patriots fans. It won't. And it shouldn't. If you're a Giants fan, you're a Giants fan. But I think what it could do and should do is come away and look at this and go, I'm never going to root for this team, but I have to admit, my respect for them has deepened. And it's sort of like going back and reading about the Yankees with DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle. And if you grew up in Boston and you've always hated that team, the Yankees, you read that and you go, wow, like what those guys built. I mean, how can you not just admire that? And I think that's what I hope that happens when people read the book and watch the docuseries, that you come away with this richer understanding of like how rare it is what we just witnessed in New England for the last 20 years.
And last one for me is when you get approached about this being turned into a docuseries and put on Apple. For one, the first part is, how'd you feel about that? And the second part is, if you got a chance to see it, how true is it to what you wrote and what you put out there? And were you real happy with the end result of the docuseries?
Well, Saron, actually, no one approached me. I approached them about doing the docuseries. It was something I wanted to do while I was writing the book. And so as soon as I finished writing the book, I went to work full time, working with the Patriots and then with Apple, and then Imagine came on board, and then the director came on board. And it was my full-time job for the last 2.5 years to make this. And it was something that I dreamed about doing while I was writing the book. And I was committed to putting the years into writing and producing the series, because I thought this story deserves this kind of dramatic telling. We had The Last Dance for Michael Jordan and the Bulls, and now we have the Dynasty for Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, Robert Kraft, and the Patriots.
So I guess along those lines, I actually wanted to ask you about The Last Dance, and if that was sort of an inspiration or something you looked at. And in terms of the documentary, what was it like? You sit down with these people, right? You talk to them to write the book, and then sitting back down with them in documentary form like a second time. Now there's cameras. What was that process like, kind of revisiting some of these stories with people you'd already talked about them with in a more television setting?
That's a great that you guys are asking. I love these questions.
Thank you.
No, the both of you guys, it's really good. So first of all, I was kind of sketching out the docuseries before The Last Dance came on television. So I didn't even know about The Last Dance. No one did when I was thinking about turning the Dynasty into a docuseries. And so it actually didn't have much in form of inspiring me or this series. In terms of your second part of the question, for sure, what happens when you write a book like this is a lot of people, when they talk to you for a book, and I had this happen with the Tiger Woods biography, is there will be plenty of people who talk, but they hold back how much they say because they're not sure exactly how much they can trust you, and they're not sure like what you're going to do with the information that they give you. And it's not until the book comes out and they read it and they see it, they can take a deep breath and go, okay, thank God he didn't embarrass me. He didn't abuse the trust. He didn't abuse the information I gave him. He didn't take me out of context. The benefit of treating people properly and professionally when you're doing a book is that if you come back for a second bite at the apple and make a documentary about the same information, they're more inclined to trust and go deeper. And that makes the docuseries all the richer and all the better. And so in this instance, it was a great experience to go back and re-interview Teddy Bruschi and Tom Brady and Robert Kraft and Drew Bledsoe and Randy Moss and all these guys, because they absolutely went further. And this time they're staring into the barrel of a camera. And so it makes for incredibly gripping television. But it all comes down to the trust relationships that you have to form in the first round when you're doing the book. And that's the bedrock of a great series.
Oh, I can't wait to check it out. The Dynasty on Apple Plus launches on Friday. And if you haven't checked the book out yet, same title, The Dynasty. Again, you can find it at pretty much anywhere. The New York Times bestseller. Jeff Benedict at Author Jeff on Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us, and really can't wait to see what you guys came up with on Friday.